Hello, thank you for tuning in to this webinar about the Hurtigruten Science Program. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Verena Meraldi and I am Chief Scientist at Hurtigruten. I have always been interested in natural sciences and that is why I studied biology in Mexico. Then I went to Switzerland and got my PhD in immunology. In my early career, I did a lot of research. This means that I was very often wearing a white coat, doing most of my work in what is called a controlled environment cabinet, and I was working with tissue samples and microscopes. I had two reasons to quit research. My lovely boys, who are now 14 and 16. And some 13 years ago, I got the opportunity to start working for Hurtigruten as a lecturer on board MS Nord-Norge. A really fantastic adventure that has evolved ever since. But enough about me. I'm here to talk about the Hurtigruten Science Program. So what is this program? Well, to start from the beginning, Hurtigruten is a tour operator that brings guests to remote places all over the world. And the people that go to these remote places of pristine beauty are not your typical charter tourist. They are there to experience something different and spectacular. Our science program has one goal, and that is to increase your curiosity, knowledge, and interests of the areas we are sailing to. We know that most of our guests love to learn about all facets of the destinations they are visiting. Over the years, from 2002, we have developed our science program on our expedition sailings step by step. On our very first voyages to Antarctica, we started with onboard lectures from experts in different fields to give our guests more context and knowledge about what they were about to experience. And they absolutely loved it. We could see that the more they knew, the more they appreciated the experience. So we started doing guiding on deck as well, pointing out interest landmarks and gave historic background to the places where we were. And we also had bird and wildlife watching from our decks. And then during the landings, we found that locating our expert guides on strategic places ashore gave even more perspective for our guests. It is obvious when you think about it. Now we are posting our experts' guides next to their areas of expertise. For example, making sure our ornithologists are in the right place next to the bird colony so that they can explain what you are seeing and reinforcing the presentations and demonstrations they gave on board. Or having an historian walking around with you in an old Viking settlement, pointing out interesting facts and telling the story of the people who lived there. You'll get so much more out of going ashore this way. Then later we put some microscopes on MS Midnattsol and transformed a part of the ship into an improvised science center. That was just a test, but we discovered how much our guests' experience were improved because they suddenly got the possibility to discover things even more firsthand, like touching feathers and then investigating them under the microscope, learning how the microstructure of the feathers helps penguins keep warm. Long story short, today we have science centers on board all of our expedition ships. What does that mean for you as a guest sailing with us today? Well, let's start with the lectures. For each destination, we have handpicked specialists and experts joining our expedition team. They all have relevant expertise about the places we are going to and are experts on wildlife, culture, history, biology, glaciology, photography, oceanography, environmental science, and earth science. When you are traveling with us, you can join in-depth lectures presented in a very educational and entertaining way. Our specialists are not only chosen because of their fields of expertise, they are also great communicators trained to share knowledge in an understanding and engaging way. As I mentioned earlier, they will also accompany you ashore so that you have live lectures about things you have learned earlier on board during the onboard lectures. To give you an example, if you are going to Greenland and you join on a lecture about the Greenlandic wildlife, you will very probably or certainly learn about the huge musk ox. Then when you go ashore, you may see a flock of them in a distance. You'll get a chance to see them a bit closer through binoculars, while our wildlife expert will be there to tell you even more about the way they live, what they eat, their migration patterns, their evolution, and how they can survive in a huge island that is mostly covered with ice. Seeing these wonderful animals from a distance, it is a bit hard to imagine how big they really are. So when you come back on board, you'll get to hold a replica of its skull, and then you will get a better idea of the size of this animal. We have clones of skulls, bones, eggs, of many types of animals that we encounter on most of our destinations. To give you another example, we have skull replicas from 3 different species of seals that we find in Antarctica. And just looking at the specialized teeth of these animals will help you understand their diet. But again, it is one thing to hear about this peculiarity, another thing is to see the teeth yourself and compare them. We also have underwater drones on all of our expedition ships. They allow us to share the underwater world, which is a real mystery to a lot of our guests. Many people don't even know what the sea flora looks like. With our equipment, we have the possibility to take samples and investigate the underwater life. Today, as I said before, we have science centers on all of our expedition ships. And just to give you an idea of how they look, this is an overview of the science centers on board MS Roald Amundsen and MS Fridtjof Nansen, our brand new hybrid ships. Here you'll find a laboratory that is equipped with state-of-the-art microscopes. There is also a wet area for preparing and presenting samples. There is a sample area where we can showcase bigger samples. And there is also a big lecture hall and an observation deck for guiding outside. You can participate in a lot of fascinating activities in the science centers. One of my favorite things to do is when we collect fresh samples of plankton using our plankton nets, and then we run a microscope session where we look at the plankton that we captured. This is especially fun if we have seen a whale not long ago, so you'll get an idea of both these huge creatures that live in the oceans, but also you will be or have the capability of seeing the smallest plankton. The plankton is actually very important for the ecosystem and serves as food for these gigantic whales. It is actually a mind-blowing experience. If you want to go full nerd, as I call it, you can also participate in several citizen science projects. These are collaboration projects with research institutions, where you, as a guest, can contribute to research through sample collecting and counting wildlife. One of these projects is observing seabirds in order to understand how they use the habitat in the southern oceans. Another project is run by NASA. NASA has records of years and years of observing clouds from above with satellites. But what they would like to do now with the Globe Observer Citizen Science Project is to link what they observe from above with what is seen from the ground. This is a very nice project as well. Happy Whale is a database where we help identify whales. Thousands of whales have been identified so far. With this citizen science project, you can follow the whales and how they move around the world. We also record leopard seals in Antarctica in order to understand better how they behave. With the Fjord Fito Citizen Science Project, we try to understand what climate change is doing to the plankton communities in the Western Antarctic Peninsula. These plankton communities are the base of the ocean's food web. And we see that climate change is altering their distribution and abundance. This has, of course, a cascade effect, because if you alter the first link in a change, every other link will be changed as well. We have another citizen science project called Secchi-Disc Study, which is trying to understand what is happening to plankton due to climate change on a global scale, not only in the southern oceans. Sailing with us, there is also a chance that you'll meet scientists on their way to their field studies on some remote part of the world. As I said previously, Hurtigruten sails to remote places all over the world. By doing this, we have the great opportunity to support the scientific communities. Polar regions are very difficult to access, and it's very expensive to bring scientists and their equipment and to do research in these parts of the world. We spend a lot of time in these areas with our ships. We go to the same places in the polar areas every year, which makes us the perfect platform for scientific research. But this is not the only reason why we wanted to get involved in science. We have also noticed that having scientists on board or participating in citizen science projects changes the perspectives of our guests. It opens them to new worlds, new things they don't even think they would learn during their trip. So we have been supporting the scientific community with logistic support for many years now. And this is a very nice example of it. During the 2018-2019 Antarctic season, Andrew Lothar from the Norwegian Polar Institute approached us. He was organizing a field trip that lasted the whole Antarctic season. He asked us if we could bring his equipment down. So we transported 5 pallets of equipment all the way from Tromsø to Antarctica on board MS Midnattssol. We also transported him and his colleague Heidi to Deception Island, where Karin Strand, our vice president in the expedition department, helped them to find the best spot to set their camp. And this was in Whalers Bay. They stayed there for 3 months, and every time one of our ships would come into Deception Island, they were welcomed on board and they had the chance to get a nice warm shower and lunch, which I can tell you they highly appreciated. But most importantly, they always took the time to share what they were doing with our guests. After 3 months in Antarctica, Andrew was able to put together a lecture while we were transporting them back to Norway, and he showed his results to our guests, the results of his very hard work. What they discovered had never been recorded before. They put trackers on chinstrap penguins so they could see how far they would go to get food when they were incubating their eggs, and compare this to after the eggs had hatched and the chicks were present. They discovered that when penguins are incubating, they can go looking for food a lot further and for a longer period. But as soon as the chicks are born, they have to stick to an area closer to the colony. This is very important because krill is the basis of the penguin's diet. And if krill is overfished, the penguins will not have enough food for themselves and for their chicks. The study that Andy did will help regulate the fisheries in Antarctic waters, and our guests learned this before anybody else in the world directly from Andy. We also cooperate with lots of different scientific institutions. We have been collaborating with the university in Svalbard for some years now. Børge Damsgaard, professor at the University of Svalbard and dean of the biology department, has developed a citizen science project in Svalbard, where students of his come on board to sample phytoplankton, involving our guests in the process and explaining the importance of plankton in the polar environments. Another collaboration we have is with Orca, which is a UK-based charity that studies marine mammals to determine their abundance and their status. This helps in the decision-making when it comes to their conservation and protection. Orca has what they called cruise conservationists, who spend most of their time out on deck looking for marine mammals and engaging with our guests. They explain the behavior of the marine mammals that we encounter, and they also help identifying the different species that we see. In addition, we have helped the Norwegian Institute for Water Research and the Norwegian Institute for Marine Research for more than 85 years. Hurtigruten's ships have been measuring sea temperature, salinity, algae growth, and other parameters along the Norwegian coast. This data from Hurtigruten represents one of the longest climatic time series in the world and is used to monitor and assess environmental conditions. Two of our ships have installed a sensor called the ferry box. This ferry box allows to measure temperature, salinity, oxygen and chlorophyll content, as well as organic carbon and particle content at a depth of 4 meters below water. And this is done as the ship sails, so it has been measuring along the routes we sail every minute. This data is then transferred via satellite and used by researchers for monitoring the natural variability in the ocean and what human impact on the oceans is, including climate change. We also have a collaboration with Ocean Visuals, who have installed laser equipment on one of our ships to measure the water, gather data, identify and classify materials that are not supposed to be in the sea. For example, in 2018, Ocean Visuals identified several incidents of oil spillage and algae bloom along the Norwegian coast. With this system, the Norwegian Coastal Administration is notified right away. Ocean Visuals are in the process of expanding operations and believes that the cooperation with Hurtigruten can have a substantial effect on oil spill identification worldwide. In addition to the citizen science projects, our guests get the opportunity to contribute in other ways. For the last decades, we have been participating in Clean Up Svalbard. We take our guests ashore and they help picking up litter, plastic, and other polluants that we find on the beaches. Of course, this is totally voluntary, but most of our guests really want to help. So we often have to do shuttle traffic between the ship and the land to get all of the volunteers ashore. Sometimes we collect tons of waste. It is easy to do this in Svalbard because the government helps by collecting the garbage that we gathered afterwards. We also do this in other destinations like the Falkland Islands, Norway, and the British Isles, but it requires enough space on board our ships so that we can transport the garbage that we collect. It can be more challenging in some of the very remote areas. There is basically a lot of fun scientific stuff that happens on board our ships. But I think it is important to mention again that you don't have to join at all if you don't want to, if you don't feel like it. This is free extra service that we offer to all of our guests, but it is on a completely voluntary basis. On the other hand, a lot of people come on board and they say, nah, I'd rather look at the view and do some optional excursions. But at the end of the trip, they won't leave the science center. So there you go. This is our science program. It is super exciting, and I am really honored to have been given the chance to develop and supervise it. Thank you very much for listening.